champagne bottle was empty, her mascara was ruined, and somewhere between the third glass and the fifth, Melina had decided that Marcus needed to hear exactly what she thought of him after 6 years together and a diamond ring that meant nothing. She hit record. Her words were fire, raw, unfiltered, devastatingly honest. When she pressed send, she felt powerful, liberated, free. Until her phone buzzed at 7 in the morning with a message that made her heart stop. "Interesting video, Miss Harper. My office, Monday, 9 o'clock sharp. Klaus Zimmermann." She hadn't sent it to Marcus. She'd sent it to her CEO. The Manhattan skyline glittered like scattered diamonds against the velvet darkness, but Melina Harper couldn't appreciate the view from her Tribeca apartment. Not tonight. Not when her carefully constructed world had shattered into 1,000 irreparable pieces just hours ago. The champagne was Veuve Clicquot, expensive, celebratory, ironic given the circumstances. She'd bought it 3 months ago when Marcus had proposed at that ridiculously pretentious restaurant in Soho, the one where a single appetizer cost more than most people's weekly groceries. She'd kept it chilled, waiting for the right moment to celebrate with her closest friends. Now she was drinking it alone, at 11:37 on a Friday night, with mascara streaking down her brown cheeks and her heart feeling like someone had taken a hammer to it. Her phone sat on the marble coffee table, Marcus's Instagram story still glowing on the screen. There he was, Marcus Chen, her fiancé of 3 months, her partner of 6 years, with his tongue down another woman's throat at some exclusive club in the meatpacking district. The woman was blonde, petite, everything Melina wasn't, and worse, far worse than the betrayal itself, were the comments underneath. "Finally moved on from that diversity hire, and upgrade complete, bro." Diversity hire. Melina poured another glass, her hands trembling with rage rather than grief. She'd graduated summa cum laude from Columbia. She'd built the most successful marketing campaign Zimmermann Industries had seen in a decade. She'd tripled their social media engagement and brought in accounts worth millions. And still, to people like Marcus and his circle, she would always be reduced to the color of her skin, her achievements dismissed as charity rather than earned. The champagne bubbles fizzed against her lips, bitter and sweet simultaneously. Somewhere between the third glass and the fourth, an idea began to form. Dangerous, liberating, necessary. She was going to tell Marcus exactly what she thought of him. Melina grabbed her phone, opened the video camera, and pressed record. Her reflection in the dark screen showed a woman transformed, natural hair wild around her shoulders, brown eyes blazing with fury and pain, full lips trembling with words that had been locked inside for too long. "Marcus," she began, her voice surprisingly steady, "you know what the saddest part is? I actually believed you when you said you loved me. When you said my success didn't intimidate you. When you claimed you were different from all those other mediocre men who needed to diminish women to feel powerful." She laughed, the sound hollow and sharp. "But you were exactly like them. Worse, actually, because you pretended to be progressive while secretly resenting every achievement, every promotion, every moment I shined brighter than you. You proposed to me because you thought it would look good for your image. The enlightened tech bro with the successful black girlfriend. Proof you weren't like the others." The champagne had loosened something inside her, words flowing like water from a broken dam. "Here's what you never understood. I didn't need you. I chose you. There's a difference. I chose to build a life with someone I thought was my equal, my partner, but you just wanted an accessory, someone impressive enough to show off, but not so successful that you'd feel threatened. Well, congratulations, Marcus. You're free now. Free to be exactly the small, insecure, basic man you've always been." She paused, taking a breath, feeling something shift inside her chest, not quite healing but perhaps the first crack in the armor of her pain. I deserve someone who isn't afraid of my light, someone who doesn't need to dim me to feel bright, someone who sees my success and thinks, "That's my woman," with pride, not resentment. You were never going to be that man. I see that now. So, thank you, actually. Thank you for showing me who you really are before I wasted any more of my precious time. Melina stopped the recording, stared at it for a long moment, then opened her messages. Her vision was slightly blurred from the alcohol, but she could see Marcus's name clearly in her recent contacts. She attached the video and pressed send before she could second-guess herself. The phone made a soft whooshing sound. Freedom, liberation, justice. She poured the last of the champagne, raised her glass to her reflection in the darkened window, and smiled. It felt good, powerful, right. Then her phone buzzed. Melina glanced down, expecting Marcus's angry response. Instead, her blood turned to ice. The message wasn't from Marcus, it was from Klaus Zimmermann, her boss, her CEO, the man who signed her paychecks and held her career in his impossibly elegant hands. "Interesting video, Miss Harper. My office, Monday morning, 9 o'clock sharp. KZ. Her phone slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the marble table. No, 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 no. With shaking hands, Melina grabbed the device and opened her sent messages. There it was, in horrifying clarity. She'd sent the video to Klaus, not Marcus. Their names were right next to each other in her recent contacts because Klaus had messaged her earlier that evening about the Thornton account. She'd sent her raw, unfiltered, emotionally devastating rant about diversity hires and mediocre men, and her ex-fiancé's inadequacies to Klaus Zimmermann. Klaus Zimmermann, who was German aristocracy and American business royalty combined. Klaus Zimmermann, whose net worth had more zeros than most people could count. Klaus Zimmermann, who was known throughout Manhattan's corporate world as brilliant, ruthless, and absolutely unforgiving of mistakes. Klaus Zimmermann, who looked like he'd stepped out of a European fashion magazine. All sharp cheekbones, ice blue eyes, and perfectly tailored suits that probably cost more than her monthly rent. "Oh, God," Melina whispered, pressing her palms against her burning cheeks. "Oh, God, oh, God, oh, God." She tried to calculate the damage. Sexual harassment. No, she hadn't said anything inappropriate about him. Unprofessional conduct. Absolutely. Grounds for termination. Probably. Using company-provided devices for personal drama. Almost certainly a violation of some clause in her contract. Melina looked around her apartment, the place she'd worked so hard to afford in one of the most expensive cities in the world. She thought about her career, the one she'd built with sweat and brilliance and relentless determination. She thought about the whispers that would follow her if she got fired. See? Couldn't handle the pressure. Diversity hire after all. The champagne that had tasted like victory moments ago now churned acidically in her stomach. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Klaus. "And Miss Harper, drink water, lots of it. Hangovers and important conversations don't mix well." Melina stared at the screen, her mind spinning. There was something almost gentle in that second message, not what she'd expected from the man known as the Ice King of Manhattan. She typed back quickly, her fingers clumsy. "Mr. Zimmermann, I am so deeply sorry. That video was meant for someone else. It was completely unprofessional and—" His response came before she could finish. "I know who it was meant for. We'll discuss it Monday. Get some rest." The conversation ended there, leaving Melina alone with her racing thoughts and the dregs of her celebratory-turned-catastrophic champagne. She stood, walked to the window, and pressed her forehead against the cool glass. The city stretched out before her, Millions of lights, millions of lives, millions of people who weren't currently contemplating their imminent professional destruction. Monday was 2 days away. 48 hours to rehearse her apology, update her resume, and prepare for the humiliation of being escorted out of Zimmerman Industries by security while her former colleagues watched with a mixture of pity and schadenfreude. But as Melina stood there, something strange happened. Beneath the panic and dread, she felt something else stirring, curiosity. Klaus's messages hadn't been angry, they'd been measured, almost careful. And that last line about hangovers had contained something that almost resembled concern. Maybe, just maybe, Monday morning wouldn't be the end of her career. Maybe it would be something else entirely, something she couldn't yet name but could feel gathering like a storm on the horizon, dangerous, inevitable, and utterly beyond her control. Monday morning arrived with cruel punctuality. Melina stood outside the Zimmerman Industries tower at 8:45, staring up at the gleaming glass structure that pierced the Manhattan sky like a blade. 73 floors of steel, ambition, and ruthless corporate efficiency. Klaus's office occupied the entire 73rd floor, a penthouse kingdom where careers were made or destroyed with a single decision. She'd spent the entire weekend oscillating between denial and acceptance. Saturday morning, she'd drafted 17 different resignation letters. Saturday afternoon, she called her best friend Simone, who worked in HR at Goldman Sachs, and asked about job prospects in case she needed a quick exit. Sunday, she'd simply existed in a state of numb dread, watching the hours tick by with the inevitability of an execution countdown. Now, dressed in her most professional armor, a charcoal grey Armani suit that had cost a month's salary, ivory silk blouse, and black Louboutin heels, Melina felt like a warrior preparing for battle. If she was going down, she would do it with dignity. The elevator ride to the 73rd floor took exactly 92 seconds. She counted everyone. Klaus's executive assistant, a formidable woman named Margaret, who'd been with the company for 27 years, looked up from her desk as Melina approached. To Melina's surprise, Margaret's expression wasn't judgmental or pitying. Instead, she smiled. Actually smiled. "Good morning, Miss Harper. Mr. Zimmerman is expecting you. He asked that you go straight in." Melina nodded, her throat too tight for words. She walked to the massive mahogany doors, knocked twice, and heard Klaus's voice from inside. "Come in." She stepped into a space that never failed to take her breath away. Klaus's office was less a workplace and more a work of art. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a 360-degree view of Manhattan. The decor was minimalist, but breathtakingly expensive. Mid-century modern furniture, a desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of black marble, and abstract paintings that Melina suspected were original Rothkos and Pollocks. Klaus stood at the window, his back to her, hands clasped behind him. Even in silhouette he was striking, 6 feet 3 inches of lean muscle and aristocratic bearing, dressed in a navy blue suit that fit him so perfectly it had to be bespoke. "Mr. Zimmerman," Melina began, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "I want to apologize." "Close the door, please," he interrupted quietly. She did. Klaus turned slowly, and Melina found herself facing the full force of his attention. At 42 years old, Klaus Zimmerman was the kind of handsome that made people stop and stare. Sharp, Germanic features softened by a sensual mouth, ice-blue eyes that seemed to see through every facade, and dark blonde hair swept back from a high forehead. But it was more than his looks. It was the intelligence in his gaze, the controlled power in his movements, the sense that he was always 3 steps ahead of everyone else in any room. "Sit," he said. Gesturing to one of the Italian leather chairs facing his desk, Melina sat, spine straight, hands folded in her lap, prepared for whatever came next. Klaus didn't return to his desk. Instead, he leaned against it, arms crossed, studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I watched your video 3 times, he said finally. Melina's stomach dropped. "Mr. Zimmerman, I cannot express how—" He held up a hand, silencing her. "The first time I was surprised. The second time, I was impressed by your eloquence under the influence of what I assume was expensive champagne." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "The third time, I was angry." Here it comes, Melina thought. The termination speech, the security escort, the end. "But not at you," Klaus continued, his voice hardening. "I was angry at the man who made you feel the need to record that message, and I was angry at a society that would reduce your considerable accomplishments to a diversity hire." Melina blinked, certain she'd misheard. Klaus moved to the window, his profile sharp against the morning light. "I know who Marcus Chen is. Tech entrepreneur, trust fund baby pretending to be self-made. I've met him at various functions. Always struck me as the type of man who views women as assets to be acquired rather than partners to be respected." I don't understand," Melina managed. "You're not going to fire me?" Klaus turned to face her fully, and there was something in his expression, something raw and unguarded that she'd never seen before in their 3 years of professional interaction. "Miss Harper, Melina, in the time you've been at Zimmerman Industries, you've brought innovation and excellence to every project you've touched. The Thornton account alone generated $73 million in revenue. Your marketing strategies have been studied by Harvard Business School as case examples of digital transformation done right. You are, without question, one of the most talented people in this company." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was lower, more intimate. "You could send me 1,000 drunken videos, and it wouldn't change that fact." Melina felt something shift in her chest, not quite relief, but something more complex. Gratitude mixed with confusion, mixed with something else entirely, something that made her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "Then why am I here?" she asked quietly. Klaus returned to his desk, but instead of sitting behind it, he perched on the edge, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something subtle and expensive, cedar and citrus and leather. "Because," he said, holding her gaze, "that video showed me something I've suspected for months. You're not happy here." "That's not true," Melina protested immediately. "I love my work. "You love the work," Klaus interrupted gently. "But you're exhausted. You're carrying burdens that shouldn't be yours to carry. Every day you walk into this building and you have to be twice as good to be considered half as competent. You have to prove yourself again and again while men like Marcus coast on mediocrity and connections." Melina stared at him, stunned by his perception. "Mr. Zimmerman—" "Klaus," he said. "When we're alone, you can call me Klaus." The intimacy of that simple permission felt dangerous. "Klaus," she repeated softly, testing the shape of his name on her tongue. "I appreciate your kindness, but you didn't need to call me in here just to tell me I'm not fired. A message would have sufficed." "I didn't call you in here just for that," Klaus said. He stood, walked to a cabinet and poured 2 glasses of water from a crystal decanter. He handed her one, and their fingers brushed. Brief, electric, impossible to ignore. "I called you in here because I wanted to tell you that I understand." He sat in the chair beside her rather than behind his desk, eliminating the physical barrier of power between them. "More than you might think." Melina took a sip of water, buying time to process this unexpected turn. "With all due respect, I don't see how someone in your position could understand what—" "My mother was Brazilian," Klaus said quietly. from São Paulo, a ballet dancer. My father was German aristocracy, heir to the Zimmermann fortune. When he brought her home to Munich, his family was less than welcoming. They called her a gold digger, an opportunist. They claimed every success she had was because of my father's influence, rather than her own considerable talent. Melina's breath caught. She'd never heard Klaus speak about his personal life. In 3 years, she'd seen him give keynote speeches, lead board meetings, and negotiate billion-dollar deals, but never once had he revealed anything truly personal. She endured it, Klaus continued, his jaw tight. For 22 years, she smiled through their condescension and proved herself over and over. She became one of the most celebrated choreographers in Europe. And still, at family gatherings, someone would always manage to suggest she'd married above her station. "Klaus," Melina whispered, moved by the pain she heard beneath his controlled tone. "She died 3 years ago. Cancer. And on her deathbed, do you know what she told me?" He looked at Melina, and his eyes were blazing with suppressed emotion. She said, "Klaus, don't let them make you small. Don't let their fear of your light convince you to dim it. Shine so bright they have no choice but to see you." Silence settled between them, heavy with shared understanding. "That's what I saw in your video," Klaus said softly. "A woman refusing to be diminished, a woman reclaiming her light. It was the most honest, courageous thing I've seen in years." Melina felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Thank you," she managed. "That means more than you know." Klaus leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his face close enough to hers that she could see the silver flecks in his blue eyes. "I have a proposition for you." Her heart stuttered. "A proposition? This weekend, I'm hosting a business retreat at my estate in the Hamptons. CEOs, board members, potential investors for our European expansion. It's critical for the company's future. I need someone there who understands our vision, who can speak intelligently about our strategies, who can navigate those conversations with grace and brilliance." "You want me at your business retreat?" Melina asked, confused. "I need you there," Klaus corrected, "as my associate. My right hand, the face of Zimmermann Industries' future." There was something in the way he said it, something in the intensity of his gaze, that suggested this invitation was about more than business. "Klaus, I'm not sure that's appropriate," Melina said carefully. "The optics of—" "Let me worry about optics," he said. "You worry about packing a bag and meeting me at the helipad Friday evening. 6 o'clock. Helipad? I don't sit in Hampton's traffic." That almost smile again, devastating in its rarity. Melina knew she should refuse, should maintain professional boundaries, should recognize that whatever was happening in this sun-drenched office was crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed. But she found herself saying, "I'll be there." Klaus stood, and Melina realized the meeting was over. He extended his hand, a formal gesture that felt anything but formal when she placed her palm against his. "And Melina," he said as she turned to leave, "for what it's worth, Marcus Chen is a fool. Any man who couldn't see your value doesn't deserve a single moment more of your thoughts." She paused at the door, looked back at him standing there in his perfect suit, with his impossible eyes and his unexpected kindness, and felt something shift irrevocably in her understanding of Klaus Zimmermann. He wasn't just her boss anymore. He was something far more dangerous. And as she walked out of his office, past Margaret's knowing smile, into the elevator that would carry her back to her regular life, Melina Harper knew with absolute certainty that accepting his invitation to the Hamptons was either the best or the worst decision she would ever make, possibly both. The helicopter ride from Manhattan to the Hamptons took 37 minutes. Melina had never been in a helicopter before. She'd certainly never been in a private helicopter piloted by her CEO while the sun set over the Atlantic Ocean, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose gold. Klaus handled the controls with the same confident precision he applied to everything else. He'd barely spoken since they'd taken off, his attention focused on navigation, but occasionally she'd catch him glancing at her, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth as she pressed her face to the window like a child. "First time?" he'd asked as they'd lifted off. "That obvious?" "You look happy. It's a good look on you." Now, as they descended toward Klaus's estate, Melina understood why people spent obscene amounts of money for property in the Hamptons. The coastline stretched like a ribbon of gold, private beaches giving way to manicured lawns and architectural masterpieces. Klaus's property, however, made the surrounding estates look modest. The main house was a study in modern elegance, 3 stories of glass and white stone that seemed to float above the dunes. Terraces cascaded down toward the beach, infinity pools reflected the evening sky, and even from the air, Melina could see sculptures and gardens that belonged in museums. "Welcome to Windmir," Klaus said through the headset as they landed on a private helipad. They were greeted by a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a crisp white shirt. "Mr. Zimmerman, welcome home." "Miss Harper, I'm Claudia, the house manager. I'll show you to your room." The inside of the house was even more breathtaking. Soaring ceilings, carefully curated art, furniture that balanced comfort with sophistication. But what struck Melina most was the warmth. Despite its size and obvious expense, Windmir felt like a home rather than a showpiece. Her suite overlooked the ocean. The bedroom alone was larger than her entire Tribeca apartment, decorated in shades of cream and sea blue. French doors opened onto a private terrace, and the sound of waves provided a constant, soothing backdrop. "The other guests will arrive tomorrow morning," Claudia explained. "Tonight, Mr. Zimmerman thought you might appreciate a quiet evening to settle in. Dinner will be served on the main terrace at 8 o'clock, if that suits you." After Claudia left, Melina stood on her terrace, breathing in the salt air and trying to process the surreal turn her life had taken. 1 week ago, she'd been engaged to Marcus. Now she was standing in a multi-million-dollar beach house, about to have dinner alone with Klaus Zimmerman. She changed into a flowing white sundress, casual but elegant, and left her hair natural, coils framing her face. No corporate armor tonight, just herself. Klaus was waiting on the main terrace when she arrived. He'd changed too, trading his usual suit for dark linen pants and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. It was the most informal she'd ever seen him, and the effect was devastating. He looked younger, more relaxed, dangerously attractive. "You found it," he said, standing as she approached. "Good. I thought you might get lost. This house has 17 bedrooms. 17, Melina laughed. "What do you do with 17 bedrooms?" "Host business retreats, mostly, and occasionally remember that I bought a house far too large for one person." The table was set with simple elegance, white linens, hurricane lamps, fresh flowers. Beyond, the ocean stretched to the horizon, the last light of day bleeding into purple twilight. Klaus poured wine, a white Burgundy, he explained, from a vineyard his family owned in France. They began with oysters and champagne mignonette, and Melina couldn't help but laugh. "Something funny?" Klaus asked. "The last time I had champagne, I sent you that video. Maybe I should avoid it." "More," Klaus said, his eyes glinting with humor. "Maybe that champagne was the best thing that could have happened. It brought you here." The courses continued. Lobster with drawn butter and fresh herbs, heirloom tomato salad, grilled sea bass that melted on the tongue. They talked easily, naturally, as if the corporate hierarchy between them had dissolved with the setting sun. Klaus asked about her childhood in Atlanta, her path to Columbia, her decision to pursue marketing. She asked about growing up between Brazil and Germany, about learning to navigate 2 worlds that often seemed at odds with each other. "My father," wanted me to be purely German, Klaus said, swirling his wine. My mother wanted me to embrace both sides. I spent most of my childhood feeling like I didn't fully belong anywhere. And now? Melina asked. Now I understand that not fitting into predefined categories can be a strength rather than a weakness. It allows you to see things others miss, to build bridges others don't even know exist. As the night deepened, they moved to the lounge area, where oversized sofas faced the ocean. Klaus lit a fire pit, and they sat with brandies, the flames dancing between them. "Can I ask you something?" Melina said, emboldened by wine and the intimacy of the setting. "Always. Why did you really invite me here? And please don't say it's just about business." Klaus was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the firelight. When he spoke, his voice was low and honest. "Because for 3 years I've watched you navigate that office with grace and brilliance. I've seen you handle condescension from men half as talented. I've seen you work twice as hard for half the recognition. And through it all, you've maintained your integrity and your light." He turned to face her fully. "That video broke something open in me. Made me see that I've been complicit in maintaining a system that forces people like you, people like my mother, to constantly prove their worth. And I needed you to know that I see you. Not as an employee, not as a diversity hire, as Melina. Remarkable, brilliant, beautiful Melina." The air between them felt charged, electric with possibility and danger. "Klaus," Melina whispered. "We can't—" "I know," he said quickly. "I know all the reasons this is complicated. I'm your boss. There are power dynamics, professional implications, but Melina, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since I saw that video. And not because it was scandalous or unprofessional, because it was real. Because for 30 seconds I saw the woman behind the corporate polish, and she took my breath away." Melina's heart was racing. She should stand up, should go back to her room, should maintain the boundaries that protected both their careers. Instead, she said, "I see you too. I have for longer than I want to admit." Klaus's expression transformed, hope and hunger and something tender all at once. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hand. His palm was warm against her cheek, his touch gentle despite the intensity in his eyes. "Tell me to stop," he said. "Tell me this is inappropriate, that we shouldn't cross this line, and I will respect that completely." But Melina didn't tell him to stop. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly at the sheer relief of being seen, being wanted, being valued not in spite of who she was, but because of it. When she opened her eyes, Klaus was closer, his face inches from hers. "I don't want you to stop," she whispered. He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the calculated corporate kisses of Marcus. This was honest and hungry and absolutely right. Klaus's hands tangled in her hair, and she pressed closer, tasting brandy and salt air and something indefinably him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Klaus rested his forehead against hers. "This changes everything," he said. "I know. The board, the other executives, the office politics, it's going to be complicated." "I know," Melina repeated. "But I don't care," Klaus said fiercely. "I've spent my entire life being careful, being appropriate, doing what was expected. And for once, I want something just because it makes me feel alive." Melina pulled back slightly, needing to see his face. "What happens tomorrow when the other guests arrive?" "Tomorrow, we're professionals, colleagues. I promised you a business retreat, and that's what you'll get. But tonight—" He traced her jawline with his thumb. "Tonight, can we just be Klaus and Melina? Two people who found something unexpected and real?" She nodded, and he kissed her again, slower this time, savoring. They stayed on the terrace until the fire burned down to embers, talking and touching and existing in a bubble where titles and hierarchies and consequences didn't matter. It was past midnight when Klaus walked her to her room. At the door, he kissed her one last time, tender and full of promise. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For sending me that video, for being brave, for being here." After he left, Melina stood on her terrace, listening to the waves and touching her lips where his kisses lingered. She knew that crossing this line with Klaus was dangerous, knew that Monday morning would bring complications she couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time since Marcus's betrayal, she felt truly seen, truly valued, truly alive. And that, she thought as she finally climbed into bed, was worth every risk. The next morning brought reality crashing back, with the arrival of 3 sleek black cars. Melina watched from her terrace as the weekend's guests emerged. Powerful men and women in expensive casual wear, already networking before they'd even entered the house. She recognized several faces from business magazines, CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, a tech mogul who'd recently made billions in a controversial merger, and a woman who'd just been appointed to the Federal Reserve. By the time Melina made it downstairs, Klaus had transformed back into the Ice King of Manhattan. Impeccably dressed in charcoal slacks and a crisp white shirt, he was all business as he greeted guests and orchestrated introductions. When his eyes met Melina's across the room, there was a flash of heat, quickly controlled. "Ah, Miss Harper," he said smoothly. "Allow me to introduce you to our guests. This is Melina Harper, Head of Marketing Strategies at Zimmerman Industries. She'll be presenting our digital transformation initiatives this afternoon." The day unfolded in a carefully choreographed dance of business discussions and relationship building. Melina presented their expansion plans with confidence and poise, fielding questions from some of the sharpest minds in American business. Klaus watched from the back of the room, his expression unreadable, but she could feel his attention on her, like a physical touch. During lunch on the main terrace, a board member named Richard Thornborough cornered her, mid-60s, silver-haired, with the entitled bearing of old money. "Miss Harper," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Impressive presentation. Though I must ask, how long have you been with Zimmerman Industries?" 3 years, Mr. Thornborough. "And you've risen quite rapidly in that time." The implication hung heavy in the air. Before Melina could respond, Klaus appeared at her side, his hand settling briefly on the small of her back, a gesture that could be interpreted as professional but felt intimate to anyone paying attention. "Melina has risen rapidly because she's exceptional," Klaus said coldly. "Her work speaks for itself. Or do you have concerns about her qualifications, Richard?" Thornborough's face tightened. "No concerns at all. Simply curious." After he walked away, Klaus leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. "Are you all right?" "I've dealt with men like him my entire career," Melina said quietly. "But thank you. You shouldn't have to deal with them." Klaus's jaw was tight. "Not here. Not anywhere." That evening, dinner was formal. 7 courses served in the grand dining room with crystal and silver and conversation that ranged from market trends to political maneuvering. Melina held her own, contributing insights that earned respectful nods even from the most skeptical guests. But it was afterward, when everyone had retired to the library for cognac and cigars, that things became complicated. Melina had stepped out onto the terrace for air when she heard voices from around the corner, Thornborough and another board member, a woman named Patricia Sterling. "I'm telling you, Patricia, there's something going on between Zimmerman and that girl." "You're imagining things, Richard." "Am I? The way he looks at her, the way he touches her, it's inappropriate. And if word gets out that he's having an affair with an employee, particularly one who's benefited from such rapid advancement, It could be catastrophic for the company. Klaus wouldn't be so foolish, wouldn't he? His mother was Brazilian, remember. Perhaps he has a taste for— Enough, Patricia cut him off sharply. That kind of talk is beneath you. Melina pressed her back against the wall, her heart pounding. They suspected. Of course they suspected. She and Klaus had been so careful, but clearly not careful enough. She slipped back inside, found Klaus in the library, and caught his eye. He excused himself smoothly and followed her to an empty hallway. They know, Melina whispered urgently. Thornborough and Sterling. They're suspicious. Klaus's expression darkened. What did they say? She told him, including Thornborough's racist implication. Klaus's fists clenched, his control slipping for just a moment. I should have him removed from the board. You can't. It would only make things worse. Melina took a breath. Klaus, maybe this was a mistake. Maybe we should— Don't, he said fiercely, stepping closer. Don't let Richard Thornborough's small-mindedness determine what we can and cannot do. But he's right about one thing. If word gets out about us, it will be complicated. For both of us, but mostly for me. She met his eyes. I'll be the diversity hire who slept her way to the top. Every achievement will be questioned, every success attributed to our relationship. Klaus cupped her face in his hands. Then we'll make sure no one can question your achievements. We'll document everything. Build such an irrefutable case for your brilliance that even Richard Thornborough will have to acknowledge it. It might not be enough. Then I'll step down, Klaus said simply. Melina's eyes widened. What? From the company, from the board. I'll appoint a successor and walk away. I'm not losing you because of corporate politics. Klaus, you can't. Zimmerman Industries is your legacy, your family's— You, he interrupted, his voice rough with emotion, are more important than any legacy. My mother taught me that. Don't diminish yourself to make small men comfortable. Don't hide your light to protect egos. And don't let fear keep you from something real. Melina felt tears threaten. This is insane. We've known each other for 3 years and really talked for 3 days. How can you be willing to give up everything for— Because those 3 days have felt more real than most of my life, Klaus said. Because when I'm with you, I remember who I wanted to be before the world taught me to be careful. Because you're extraordinary, Melina Harper, and I refuse to let boardrooms and bias keep me from telling you that. She kissed him then, not caring that they were in a hallway where anyone could see, not caring about consequences or complications. When they broke apart, Klaus rested his forehead against hers. We'll figure this out, together. But I need you to promise me something. What? Don't run. When this gets difficult, and it will, don't disappear on me. Let's face it together. I promise, Melina whispered. No running. They stood there in the hallway, holding each other while the party continued without them, both knowing that the peace they'd found in this weekend bubble was about to burst spectacularly. But for that moment, it was enough to simply be together. Manhattan greeted them Monday morning with its characteristic indifference. Millions of people rushing to millions of destinations, none of them aware that Melina Harper's carefully constructed world was about to implode. The return helicopter ride had been quiet, both she and Klaus wrapped in their own thoughts. They'd spent Sunday morning maintaining perfect professional distance in front of the retreating guests, but Sunday night, after everyone had left, they'd walked the beach together under a canopy of stars, talking until dawn about dreams and fears and the impossible situation they found themselves in. We'll be smart about this, Klaus had said, his hand warm in hers. Discreet until we figure out the best path forward. Discreet. That word haunted Melina as she walked into Zimmerman Industries Monday morning, hyper-aware of every glance, every whispered conversation that stopped as she passed. She was halfway to her office when Simone intercepted her. "We need to talk," Simone said, her expression grim. "Now!" They ducked into an empty conference room. Simone pulled out her phone and showed Melina an email that had been forwarded through what looked like half the company. It was from Marcus. The subject line read, "The truth about Melina Harper." Melina's hands trembled as she read. Marcus had written a lengthy, detailed account of their relationship and breakup. Only his version painted her as ambitious to the point of ruthlessness, someone who'd used him for connections and discarded him the moment someone more powerful came along. He heavily implied that her rapid rise at Zimmerman Industries was due to a relationship with Klaus, citing suspicious behavior at the Hamptons retreat, which someone had apparently reported to him. The email ended with, "I'm sharing this because the business community deserves to know who they're dealing with. Melina Harper is talented, but she's also willing to use any means necessary to get ahead. Klaus Zimmerman should be careful. He's not the first powerful man she's targeted, and he won't be the last." Melina felt bile rise in her throat. This is character assassination." "It's worse than that," Simone said. "It's calculated and strategic. He sent it to competitors, board members, industry press. By this afternoon, it'll be everywhere." "But none of it is true." "Doesn't matter. The narrative is out there now. And you know how this works, Mel. Deny it, and you look defensive. Ignore it, and silence equals confirmation." Simone gripped her hand. "You need to get ahead of this. Now." Melina's phone buzzed. A text from Klaus. "My office, immediately." She made it there in record time. Klaus was standing at his window, his posture rigid with barely controlled rage. When he turned to face her, his eyes were blazing. "I assume you've seen the email." "Yes." "It's actionable. Defamatory. I've already got our legal team." "Klaus, stop!" Melina held up a hand. "Legal action will just make this bigger, give the story more oxygen. So we just let him destroy your reputation?" "I don't know," Melina's voice cracked. "I don't know what to do. But I know that if you ride to my rescue, it will only confirm everything he's implying, that I need a powerful man to protect me, that I can't fight my own battles." Klaus crossed to her, gripping her shoulders. "You shouldn't have to fight this battle alone." "But I do. Because that's the reality of being a woman in this industry, being a black woman in this industry. One mistake, one perceived impropriety, and everything I've built crumbles." "Then we go public," Klaus said firmly, "with the truth, with us. Show them that this is real, not some calculated career move." "Are you insane?" Melina pulled away. "Klaus, we've been, whatever we are, for 3 days. We can't blow up both our careers over 3 days. It's more than 3 days, and you know it." His voice softened. "Melina, I've been falling for you for months. Maybe years. The video just gave me permission to finally admit it." She wanted to fall into those words, to let herself believe in them. But reality pressed in from all sides. "The board will force you out," she said quietly, "or force you to choose between the company and me. And Klaus, I can't be the reason you lose everything your family built." "You're not hearing me." Klaus cupped her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. "I choose you, regardless of the cost." Melina's phone buzzed again, then again, and again. She glanced down and felt her stomach drop. The story had hit the business press. Headlines scrolled past. Zimmerman Industries under fire for alleged workplace affair. CEO Klaus Zimmerman's relationship with employee raises ethics questions. Diversity hire or boardroom romance inside Melina Harper's rapid rise. "It's already too late," Melina whispered. The rest of Monday passed in a nightmarish blur. Melina was summoned to HR for a preliminary inquiry. She was asked to provide documentation of her achievements, as if her work over 3 years wasn't already extensively documented. She was questioned about her relationship with Klaus, with the kind of clinical detachment that made her feel like a specimen under glass. Through it all, Klaus was in meetings with the board, fighting battles she could only imagine. By 5 o'clock, Melina was emotionally exhausted. She was packing up her office, preparing to go home and figure out what came next, when her phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello? Melina Harper." The voice was female, professional. "This is Jennifer Martinez from the Wall Street Chronicle. I was hoping to get your comment on the allegations." Melina hung up. The phone rang again immediately. Different number, same request. Then another, and another. The press had her number. Of course they did. Marcus had probably given it to them. She was trapped in her office, phone ringing incessantly, when Klaus appeared in her doorway. "Come with me," he said. "Now." He led her to the executive elevator, the one that went directly to the parking garage. His driver was waiting with the car, not the company car, she noted, but his personal vehicle, a sleek black Aston Martin. "Get in." "Klaus, I should go home. Your apartment is surrounded by reporters. I checked." He opened the car door. "Trust me, please." She got in. They drove in silence through Manhattan traffic, eventually pulling up to a building in the West Village. Klaus led her upstairs to a penthouse apartment, not as ostentatious as she'd expected. Warm, lived in, filled with books and art and the kind of comfortable furniture that invited curling up with wine and conversation. "Is this your place?" Melina asked. "One of them. The one no one knows about except my closest friends." "You'll be safe here. No reporters, no board members, just—" He gestured helplessly. "Space to breathe." Melina walked to the window overlooking a small, tree-lined street. Outside, the city carried on, indifferent to her crumbling career. "I should resign," she said quietly. "Make this all go away." "No." Klaus's voice was sharp. "That's exactly what they want. Richard Thornborough, Marcus Chen, all the people who are threatened by your excellence. They want you to disappear. To prove that women like you don't really belong in their world. Maybe they're right." The words tasted like ash. "Maybe I was delusional to think I could have it all. Success and integrity and love." Klaus crossed to her, turning her to face him. "Listen to me. You are one of the most brilliant people I've ever met. Your work is extraordinary. Your strategies have transformed this company. And yes, we've become involved, but that doesn't erase or diminish anything you've achieved. The board won't see it that way. Then I'll make them see it, or I'll leave and start something new, with you if you'll have me." Melina's eyes filled with tears. "Why are you doing this? Why are you risking everything for me?" "Because my mother taught me that some things are worth fighting for. Because you showed me what courage looks like when you recorded that video and refused to be diminished. Because—" He paused, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen him. "Because I love you, Melina. I know it's too soon and too complicated and too improbable, but I love you." She kissed him then, desperately, as if she could somehow transfer her fear and hope and confusion through the press of their lips. Klaus held her tightly, and for a moment the world outside ceased to matter. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Melina said, "I love you too. God help me, I do. But Klaus, loving each other isn't enough. We still have to face reality. Then we'll face it together, starting tomorrow." That night they ordered takeout and talked strategy. Klaus showed her the documentation his team had compiled. Every achievement, every metric, every irrefutable piece of evidence that proved Melina's value to the company. He'd also had the legal team prepare cease and desist letters for Marcus and any press outlet that published defamatory claims without verification. "We're going to be proactive," Klaus explained. not defensive. You're going to give one interview, exclusive, carefully chosen outlet, where you tell your story, your way. We control the narrative. And us? Melina asked. We tell the truth, that we developed feelings for each other, that we're navigating this as professionally as possible, that your achievements stand on their own merit. He took her hand. And we show them that we're not ashamed, that we have nothing to hide. It was a good plan, a bold plan. But as Melina lay in Klaus's guest room that night, he'd insisted on propriety despite everything. She couldn't shake the feeling that something else was coming. Some other revelation that would upend even this careful strategy. She was right. At 2:37 in the morning, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Against her better judgment, she opened it. It was a photo. Klaus and a woman, blonde, beautiful, clearly pregnant. They were standing in what looked like a hospital lobby, his arm around her, both of them smiling. The text below read, "Interesting that he didn't mention his fiancée and unborn child. Ask Klaus about Katharina Vanderhoff. She's been waiting for him to come back from his business trip. Thought you should know who you're really dealing with." Melina stared at the photo until her eyes burned. The woman looked radiant. Klaus looked happy. And the caption on the image, time-stamped 2 weeks ago, said, "Baby Zimmerman coming soon." It had to be fake, a manipulation. Marcus playing more games. But doubt, once planted, was difficult to uproot. Melina sat in the darkness, holding her phone, and wondered if she'd traded one dishonest man for another, or if the truth was even more complicated than she could imagine. Melina didn't sleep. She sat in Klaus's guest room, staring at that photo until sunrise painted the windows gold, her mind cycling through every interaction, every moment, looking for clues she might have missed. At 6:43 in the morning, she heard Klaus moving around the apartment. She found him in the kitchen making coffee, dressed in running clothes. Apparently even billionaire CEOs in crisis maintained their morning routines. "You're up early," he said, then noticed her expression. "What happened?" Melina held out her phone without speaking. Klaus took it, studied the photo, and to Melina's shock, he laughed. Not cruel or dismissive, genuinely amused. "Oh, Marcus is clever, I'll give him that." "So it's fake?" Relief flooded through her. "No, the photo is real. That's Katharina Vanderhoff." Klaus handed back her phone and poured 2 cups of coffee. "My cousin. 4th cousin technically, but family is family." Melina blinked. "Your cousin?" "She married a Swedish diplomat last year. They're expecting twins in 3 months. I was at the hospital with her because she had a scare, early contractions. Her husband was stuck in Geneva at a conference. Family emergency." He pulled out his own phone, scrolled through photos, and showed Melina, Klaus at a wedding, arm around the same blonde woman who was laughing, while a tall, Nordic-looking man kissed her cheek. Klaus with the same woman and her husband at what looked like a family gathering. Klaus and the woman making silly faces at the camera, her pregnant belly prominent. "Katharina and I grew up together. She's like a sister to me. And yes, there will be a baby Zimmerman. Technically a baby Vanderhoff, but I'm just going to be Uncle Klaus, not Father Klaus." He set down his phone. "Marcus clearly did his research, found photos of us together and spun a narrative he knew would hurt you." Melina slumped against the counter, exhaustion and relief making her legs weak. "I should have asked you immediately." "You should have," Klaus agreed, but gently. "But I also understand why you didn't. Marcus has given you every reason to distrust, and I should have been more forthcoming about my personal life." "Do you have anything else I should know?" Melina asked. "Any other relatives Marcus might use against us?" Klaus smiled. "I have an extensive family tree spanning 3 continents. I'm sure Marcus could manufacture scandals from half of them, but Melina, here's what matters. I'm choosing to build something with you, and that requires trust, on both sides. She nodded, accepting the implicit challenge. Trust after betrayal wasn't easy, but it was necessary. So what now? She asked. Now we go to war. The emergency board meeting was called for 10 o'clock that morning. Klaus had spent 2 hours on phone calls, rallying allies and preparing his strategy. Melina had reached out to her own contacts, fellow executives who'd witnessed her work firsthand, clients who could attest to her impact, even a few journalists who were interested in hearing her side of the story. At 9:45, Klaus and Melina walked into Zimmerman Industries together, deliberately together, no sneaking in separately, no pretending they hadn't arrived in the same car. If they were going to face this, they would do it openly. The whispers started immediately. Melina held her head high, channeling every ounce of her mother's teaching. Don't let them see you break. Show them strength, baby girl, always strength. The boardroom on the 73rd floor was packed, not just the 12 board members, but also senior executives, legal counsel, and the company's PR team, all there to witness what everyone assumed would be Klaus's forced resignation or Melina's termination, possibly both. Richard Thornborough was already positioned at the head of the table, a subtle but deliberate power move, sitting in Klaus's usual chair. Klaus noticed, but said nothing. Instead, he and Melina took seats side by side in the middle of the table. Thank you all for coming on short notice, Thornborough began. We have serious matters to discuss regarding— May I speak first, Richard? Klaus interrupted, his tone polite but unyielding. Thornborough's jaw tightened. This is highly irregular. I'm still CEO of this company, Klaus said quietly. Until you formally vote to remove me, I believe I have the floor. An uneasy silence settled over the room. Finally, Thornborough gestured for him to continue. Klaus stood, buttoning his suit jacket, a small gesture that somehow commanded the entire room's attention. For the past 48 hours, this company has been at the center of a manufactured scandal. Allegations have been made about Miss Harper's character and professional conduct. Implications have been drawn about my judgment and leadership, and at the root of all of it is one simple question. Did Melina Harper and I develop a personal relationship, and if so, does that relationship compromise either of our positions? He paused, letting the question hang in the air. The answer is yes. Melina and I have developed feelings for each other. Feelings that evolved over years of professional respect and friendship. We have been extraordinarily careful to maintain appropriate boundaries. We have disclosed this relationship to HR and legal counsel, and we are committed to ensuring that our personal connection in no way compromises the integrity of this company. Murmurs rippled through the room. Thornborough leaned forward. Klaus, surely you see how this appears. A CEO in a relationship with a subordinate. Melina is not my subordinate, Klaus cut him off sharply. She reports directly to the board, not to me. She has her own department, her own budget, her own authority. Our professional relationship has always been one of colleagues, not supervisor and employee. That's a technicality. It's a fact. Klaus's voice hardened. And I find it interesting, Richard, that you're so concerned about appearances now, when you've never once questioned the judgment of male executives who married their assistants, dated their direct reports, or hired their mistresses into cushy positions. Suddenly, when it involves a black woman who's earned every accolade she's received, it's inappropriate. The room went dead silent. That's not what Thornborough sputtered. Isn't it? Klaus turned to address the entire board. For 3 years, you've all benefited from Melina's brilliance. She's brought innovation, revenue, and prestige to this company. But the moment her personal life becomes public, suddenly her achievements are suspect. Suddenly we need to investigate whether she's really qualified. Patricia Sterling, the board member Melina had overheard in the Hamptons, spoke up. "Klaus, you know I respect Miss Harper's work, but you must admit the optics are problematic. The public perception is shaped by a vindictive ex-partner who weaponized sexism and racism to destroy a woman who had the audacity to refuse him," Klaus said bluntly. "And if we capitulate to that, if we force Melina to resign or punish her for a relationship between two consenting adults, we're telling every talented woman in this company that her achievements will always be reduced to who she's sleeping with." Melina felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. This was her battle too, time to fight. She stood. "May I speak?" Klaus nodded and sat down, his hand briefly touching hers under the table, a gesture of support invisible to everyone else. "I came to this country from Atlanta, Georgia, with nothing but a scholarship and a dream," Melina began, her voice steady and strong. "I graduated summa cum laude from Columbia. I worked 80-hour weeks to prove myself. Every campaign I've created, every strategy I've developed, every account I've secured, I did that. Not Klaus, not any man. Me." She looked around the table, meeting each board member's eyes. "Yes, Klaus and I have developed feelings for each other, but that happened because we spent years working together, respecting each other, challenging each other to be better. It wasn't a calculated career move. It wasn't an inappropriate power dynamic. It was two people recognizing something real in the midst of their professional lives." "Miss Harper," Thornborough interjected, "no one is questioning your talent." "Yes, you are," Melina interrupted firmly. "That's exactly what you're doing. Because if you weren't questioning my talent, this meeting wouldn't be happening. If I were a mediocre white man who'd secured half the accounts I have, no one would dare suggest my success was due to sleeping with the CEO. But because I'm a black woman who refused to stay small and silent, suddenly everything I've achieved is suspect." She paused, gathering her courage for what came next. "So here's what I'm proposing. Conduct a full independent review of my work. Bring in outside consultants. Interview every client, every team member, every person I've worked with. Audit every metric, every campaign, every decision I've made. If you find that my work is anything less than exemplary, if you find any evidence that my relationship with Klaus compromised my judgment or the company's integrity, I will resign immediately." The board members exchanged glances. It was a bold move, and they knew it. "But," Melina continued, "if that review confirms what Klaus and I already know, that my work speaks for itself, that I've earned every position I've held, then I expect this board to publicly support me. To make it clear that Zimmerman Industries values talent and integrity over gossip and manufactured scandal." Patricia Sterling nodded slowly. "That seems fair." "And if that review comes back in Miss Harper's favor," Klaus added, standing beside Melina, "I expect this board to also address the underlying bias that made this meeting necessary in the first place. We need policies that protect all employees from exactly this kind of character assassination. We need to ensure that personal relationships are handled with transparency and fairness, regardless of the individuals involved." Thornborough looked like he'd swallowed something bitter. "And if the board disagrees with these terms?" "Then you'll have my resignation," Klaus said simply, "effective immediately, and I'll take my patents, my connections, and my vision to a new company, one that values people over optics." The implied threat hung in the air. Klaus Zimmerman was Zimmerman Industries. Without him, the company would survive, but it would never thrive the same way. The board members huddled, whispering urgently. Finally, Patricia Sterling, who Melina was quickly reassessing as more ally than enemy, spoke up. I move that we accept Miss Harper's proposal, full independent review, with the understanding that if her work is vindicated, this board will issue a public statement of support. Seconded, another board member said. The vote was 11-1. Only Thornborough abstained. Motion carries, Patricia announced. Miss Harper, Mr. Zimmerman, thank you for your candor. We'll appoint the review committee by end of business today. As the meeting adjourned and board members filed out, several stopped to shake Melina's hand or offer words of support. Even Thornborough, though he looked pained, managed a curt nod. When the room finally cleared, leaving just Klaus and Melina, he pulled her into a fierce embrace. You were magnificent, he whispered into her hair. I was terrified, she admitted. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it. He pulled back to look at her. Whatever the review finds, though we both know what it will find, I want you to know something. I am so proud to stand beside you, so honored that you'd take this risk with me. Klaus, Melina said softly, cupping his face in her hands. You taught me something important. You taught me that love doesn't require diminishing yourself, that the right person will celebrate your light instead of fearing it. That's worth fighting for. He kissed her then, in the boardroom where so many battles had been fought, and it felt like a victory. 3 weeks later, the independent review came back exactly as they'd predicted. Melina's work was not just exemplary but exceptional. The review noted that her campaigns had generated over $100 million in revenue, that her strategies were studied as case examples at business schools, and that every single client and colleague interviewed praised her professionalism and brilliance. The board issued a public statement, Thornborough's name conspicuously absent from the signatures. Marcus's allegations were thoroughly debunked. Several media outlets that had run with his story issued retractions. But the real victory came when Melina walked into the office Monday morning and saw a new position posted, Chief Innovation Officer, reporting directly to the board, with authority over multiple departments and a seat in executive leadership meetings. Klaus was waiting in her office with champagne, the good kind, not the kind she'd drunkenly consumed the night this all started. Congratulations, Chief Innovation Officer Harper, he said with a smile. Did you create this position for me? She asked suspiciously. The board created it. I merely suggested that the company needed someone visionary in that role. You earned it. Melina laughed, accepting the glass he offered. You know people will still talk. Let them talk. We'll be too busy building something extraordinary. They clinked glasses, and Melina thought about how far she'd come from that night 3 weeks ago when her world had shattered. She'd sent a drunken video to the wrong person, and somehow it had led her here, to a career-defining promotion, to a love that challenged and elevated her, to a future that looked nothing like she'd planned, but everything like she'd dreamed. Thank you, she said to Klaus. For what? For seeing me, the real me. Not the polished professional or the diversity hire or any of the labels people try to stick on me. Just Melina. Klaus set down his glass and pulled her close. That's the only version of you I've ever seen, the only one I'll ever want. As they stood there in her office, champagne fizzing in their glasses and the Manhattan skyline glittering beyond the windows, Melina realized something profound. She'd spent so many years trying to prove herself, to earn her place, to be exceptional enough that no one could question her worth. But the real freedom came from knowing her worth without needing anyone's validation. From choosing someone who amplified rather than diminished her, from understanding that love and success weren't mutually exclusive, they could coexist, support each other, create something neither could achieve alone. It had started with a drunken mistake and a message sent to the wrong person, but it had become the rightest thing in her life. And as Klaus kissed her in the office, where they'd first acknowledged their feelings, where they'd fought for their truth and won, Melina Harper finally understood what her mother had meant all those years ago. Baby girl, someday you'll find someone who isn't afraid of your light, someone who says, shine brighter instead of tone it down. And when you find that person, hold on tight and never let go. She'd found him, and she was never letting go. 6 months later, the charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art was the social event of the season. Manhattan's elite mingled beneath soaring ceilings and priceless art, dressed in designer gowns and custom tuxedos, all gathered to support educational initiatives for underprivileged youth. Melina stood at the top of the grand staircase in a deep emerald gown that hugged her curves, her natural hair styled in elegant coils, diamonds glittering at her throat, a gift from Klaus for her 33rd birthday. Below, she could see Klaus surrounded by admirers, commanding the room effortlessly in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. He looked up as if sensing her presence, and his entire face transformed when their eyes met. That smile, the one reserved only for her, made her heart skip. As she descended the stairs, she thought about how much had changed in 6 months. The independent review had vindicated her completely. Her promotion had opened doors she'd never imagined, and her relationship with Klaus had deepened into something steady and real, built on mutual respect and genuine partnership. They'd kept their relationship relatively private, but they no longer hid. Tonight, they'd arrived together, walked the red carpet together, made it clear to Manhattan society that they were committed. "Miss Harper," a voice said beside her. She turned to find Richard Thornborough, looking uncomfortable in his formal wear. "Might I have a word?" Melina raised an eyebrow but nodded graciously. "I owe you an apology," Thornborough said stiffly. "I let my preconceptions color my judgment. Your work since the review has been exceptional. Not that it wasn't before, but I failed to see it properly. I was wrong. It wasn't eloquent, and it certainly wasn't sufficient, but it was something. Thank you, Mr. Thornborough. I appreciate you saying that." He nodded and retreated into the crowd. Melina continued her descent until she reached Klaus, who immediately pulled her into his side. "You look stunning," he murmured into her ear. "You look pretty good yourself." They circulated through the gala, Klaus never leaving her side. They spoke with investors about Zimmerman Industries' expansion into sustainable technology. They networked with other CEOs. They laughed with friends and posed for photographers. And through it all, Melina felt content. Not perfect. Life was still complicated, work was still demanding, and she still occasionally encountered people who questioned her achievements. But she had someone who stood beside her through all of it. Someone who challenged her to be better while loving her exactly as she was. Late in the evening, Klaus led her to a quiet gallery away from the crowds. They stood before a massive Monet, the water lilies seeming to shimmer in the low light. "I have something for you," Klaus said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "Klaus, you already gave me the necklace. It's not jewelry." He pulled out a small velvet box, and Melina's breath caught. "Klaus, before you panic," he said with a slight smile, "this isn't a proposal, not yet. We've only been together 6 months, and we've spent half that time dealing with corporate crises, but I wanted you to have this." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring with a single small diamond, nowhere near as ostentatious as the necklace she wore or the jewelry she knew he could afford. "This was my mother's," Klaus explained softly. "She wore it every day, even after my father bought her much more expensive rings. She said it reminded her of who she was before wealth and status tried to define her. It reminded her to stay true to herself." Tears gathered in Melina's eyes. "I want you to have it. Not as an engagement ring, though if you'll have me, I'll ask you properly someday, but as a reminder. A reminder that you are extraordinary exactly as you are. that your worth doesn't come from anyone's approval or validation, that you should never, ever dim your light for anyone. Klaus took her hand and slid the ring onto her right ring finger. It fit perfectly. When I'm ready to propose, he continued, his voice rough with emotion, I'll get you the biggest diamond Manhattan has ever seen. I'll plan something elaborate and romantic and worthy of you. But this ring, this is just about who you are, who my mother was, the strength and beauty and brilliance that doesn't need validation from anyone. Melina couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. Instead, she pulled Klaus into a kiss that spoke everything she couldn't say, gratitude and love and commitment and hope. When they finally broke apart, Klaus rested his forehead against hers. Thank you, he whispered. For what? For sending that drunken video to the wrong person. Best mistake either of us ever made. Melina laughed through her tears. Best mistake ever, she agreed. They stood there in the quiet gallery, surrounded by priceless art, but focused only on each other, both knowing that they'd found something infinitely more valuable than corporate success or social approval. They'd found home in each other, and as they walked back to the gala together, Melina glanced down at the simple gold ring on her finger and smiled. It was a reminder of everything she'd overcome, everything she'd achieved, and everything she'd become. But more than that, it was a promise, to herself and to the remarkable man beside her, that she would never again let fear keep her from her own light. She would shine, and anyone who loved her would celebrate that brightness rather than fearing it. It was a lesson learned through heartbreak and champagne, and a video sent to the wrong person. But it was the most important lesson of all. And Melina Harper, Chief Innovation Officer of Zimmerman Industries, partner to Klaus Zimmerman, keeper of her own extraordinary light, finally understood what it meant to be both powerful and loved. She could have both. She deserved both. And she was never settling for anything less again.